The pounding on the door was so loud it felt like the walls were shaking, like someone was trying to break their way into a bank vault instead of knock on a neighbor's front door. My wife Emma didn't move an inch. She sat at the dining table, sipping her morning coffee, steam curling from the cup like it had no idea there was a storm raging just a few feet away. The badge she had set down earlier gleamed faintly beside her mug, but it was face down so you wouldn't know what it was unless you picked it up. To her, this was just another morning, another entitled neighbor trying to make themselves feel important. But to me, I could feel the tension building. Because when that kind of knocking comes from her, the one everyone in the neighborhood knows, it means trouble. And sure enough, when I peeked through the blinds, there she was. Karen. Not just any Karen, but the HOA Karen. The one who strutted around our cul-de-sac like she had been crowned queen of the land. She had her oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, a giant sun hat pulled low, and of course, her clipboard clutched in her arm like it was a sacred text. Even from behind the glass, I could see the way her lips were pursed so tightly they looked ready to implode. She raised her fist and banged again, yelling, "Open up. This is HOA business." Her voice cut through the quiet morning like a siren, demanding, commanding, as if the world owed her immediate obedience. I glanced back at Emma, half expecting her to get up, maybe roll her eyes and answer, but no. She calmly stirred her coffee, gave me the smallest smirk, and shook her head. "You're not going to answer her?" I asked, almost whispering. "Nope," Emma said, not even looking up from her cup. "Why would I?" I blinked. "Because she's not going to leave you alone if you don't." "Good," Emma replied, leaning back in her chair. "Let her waste her time. I don't answer to bullies. And she's about as big of a bully as they come." I had to admit, she had a point. Karen was relentless. For years, people in this neighborhood had been living under her constant harassment. If your grass grew half an inch too tall, she was on your porch. If your car was parked facing the wrong way, she left a note. If your trash bins weren't pulled in within 20 minutes of the truck leaving, she threatened fines. It wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice, it was about keeping herself in control. I remember last month when she nearly had a meltdown because one family painted their shutters navy blue instead of the approved shade of dark gray. She called 3 emergency board meetings over it, as if mismatched shutters were a threat to national security. So when she started pounding at our door, clipboard at the ready, I already knew this wasn't going to be about anything important. Probably some nonsense about the color of our mailbox or the fact that our garden hose wasn't wrapped up aesthetically. Emma, on the other hand, wasn't giving her an ounce of power. She sat there with a calmness that made me jealous. Maybe it was because she'd spent years dealing with far worse than an HOA dictator. Being in law enforcement, she had stared down hardened criminals, walked into tense standoffs, and faced people who were truly dangerous. Compared to that, Karen was little more than a barking dog trying to sound bigger than it was. What made it even funnier to me was that Karen had no clue who she was dealing with. To Karen, Emma was just the new woman on the block, another resident to push around, another household to dominate with her endless rules and ridiculous demands. She had no idea that Emma was the brand new chief of police for the county, sworn in just last week, a woman who commanded respect from an entire department. If Karen thought she could bully Emma into opening the door, she was in for a rude awakening. Still, Karen wasn't giving up. I could hear her pacing on the porch, muttering angrily to herself. Then came another round of pounding, louder than before. "I know you're in there. HOA rules state you must respond to notices and inspections within 24 hours. You're already non-compliant." I rolled my eyes so hard it almost hurt. "What notice?" I asked Emma quietly. "She hasn't given us one." Emma shrugged, still calm. "Doesn't matter. Even if she did, she doesn't get to barge into our home whenever she feels like it. And ignoring her isn't illegal. She can stomp all she wants." I couldn't help but grin a little at the confidence in her voice. She wasn't rattled in the slightest. Meanwhile, I kept peeking through the blinds like a kid watching a Saturday morning cartoon villain about to blow their top. Karen's face was getting redder by the second, her gestures bigger, her muttering louder. At one point, she actually stepped back and wrote something furiously on her clipboard, probably trying to invent a violation to pin on us. But Emma was right, every second she stood there was her own time wasted. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would eventually realize she wasn't getting anywhere and storm off in a huff. But I should have known better. Karen never walked away defeated, at least not without making a scene first. She thrived on control, and if she couldn't get it at the door, she was going to find another way. I didn't know it at the time, but her next move was already forming in her head. And it wasn't going to be a simple nasty note or another HOA fine threat. No, Karen had decided she was going to escalate this beyond anything we had seen before. And when she did, it would set off a chain of events that not only backfired spectacularly but would also expose her as the petty tyrant she really was. At that moment though, I just stood by the window, watching her pace, watching her seethe, sipping my coffee nervously while Emma sipped hers like she was watching birds at the feeder. I couldn't help but think, this woman has no idea who she's messing with. But she was about to find out. About 10 minutes later, just when I thought Karen might finally give up and stomp back to her house in defeat, the faint wail of sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood morning. My stomach sank. I turned to Emma, who didn't look surprised at all. She calmly placed her empty coffee cup in the sink, straightened her shirt, and tucked her badge into her pocket without a word. I rushed back to the window, pulling the blinds open just enough to peek outside, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. 2 police cruisers were pulling up to the curb in front of our house, lights flashing but sirens already off, rolling slow like they were responding to something serious. And there at the end of our driveway, arms flailing like she was directing air traffic, stood Karen. She was grinning triumphantly, pointing toward our home as if she had just uncovered a criminal hideout. "That's the house." I could hear her shouting even through the glass. "That's the one. The woman inside refuses to comply with HOA regulations. She's ignoring mandatory inspections and hiding suspicious behavior. I demand you investigate immediately." My mouth went dry. Was this real life? Did this woman seriously just call law enforcement because Emma didn't answer the door? I turned to Emma, but she looked utterly unfazed, almost amused. "Suspicious behavior?" I whispered. Emma smirked faintly. "Yeah, like the suspicious behavior of drinking coffee and minding my own business." Outside, the 2 officers split up. The younger one, maybe in his late 20s, started walking up toward our porch with a serious look on his face. The older one stayed back by the patrol car, listening to Karen go on and on as she pointed at our house and waved her clipboard like it was a legal document. "She's violating community standards. Her backyard fence looks like it was modified without approval. There are weeds visible from the street. And she refuses to respond when the HOA requires it. That's grounds for removal." I nearly laughed out loud. Grounds for removal? The way she was carrying on, you'd think Emma had built an underground bunker in the backyard and was plotting to overthrow the neighborhood. The younger officer knocked on our door, and this time, Emma stood. She didn't rush. She didn't look nervous. She simply walked over, adjusted her posture, and opened the door like she had been expecting company. "Good morning, officers," she said calmly. The younger cop cleared his throat. Ma'am, we got a call about a disturbance. The HOA representative here claims you refused a compliance inspection and ignored multiple notices." Emma raised an eyebrow, not even bothering to look toward Karen, who was practically bouncing on her heels behind him. "A disturbance?" she asked, her tone even but firm. "Yes, ma'am," the officer said, a little hesitant now. She reported you refused to comply and then refused to answer the door when she attempted to serve you. That's when Karen pushed forward, interrupting. That's right. That's her. She's the one. She thinks she's above the rules. She refuses to let me do my job. Arrest her for obstruction if you must. This neighborhood has standards, and she's already breaking them. Emma didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she slid her hand into her pocket, pulled out her badge, and held it up for the officer to see. Chief Emma Lawson, County Police Department. I think you'll find I'm not the one out of line here. The effect was instant. The officer's eyes widened. His entire posture changed, shoulders back, chin up, tone suddenly respectful. Chief, he repeated, as if making sure he'd heard her correctly. Emma gave him a nod. That's correct. And right now, I'm seeing an abuse of police resources and a false report from an HOA president who's decided to weaponize your department because I didn't answer my door fast enough. Behind him, Karen's jaw dropped. The smug grin drained off her face so quickly it was almost comical. Wait, Chief? What do you mean, Chief? She's lying. She can't be, she just moved in. Emma turned her gaze toward her, calm but sharp enough to cut through steel. I'm not lying. I was sworn in last week. Which means you didn't just harass a neighbor this morning, you tried to drag my own officers into your personal power trip. The young cop glanced back at his partner, who had walked closer now, clearly recognizing Emma and giving her a subtle nod of respect. The shift in power was like flipping a switch. Just minutes ago, Karen had been strutting around, ordering everyone like she was a general. Now, she looked like a kid caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Her face turned red, her voice cracking as she stammered, This is outrageous. She ignored me. That's not how it works. HOA rules are law around here. Emma folded her arms, the badge still glinting in her hand. No. HOA rules are guidelines for property upkeep, not laws. And ignoring your knock is not, and will never be, a crime. You don't get to call the police because your feelings are hurt. The younger officer gave the faintest smile, like he was secretly enjoying watching Karen squirm. The older one spoke up for the first time. Ma'am, I think we're done here. There's no disturbance, and this is not a police matter. You'll need to resolve your HOA issues without calling us again. But Karen wasn't ready to let go of her imaginary crown. But she can't just ignore me, she shouted, her voice desperate now. She has to listen. That's the rule. That's the law. Emma didn't raise her voice, didn't even frown. She just tilted her head slightly, her calmness more intimidating than any yell could have been. No, Karen. The law is what I enforce. And you just wasted department resources, embarrassed yourself in front of half the block, and showed everyone exactly how far you're willing to go to cling to control you don't actually have. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, she was speechless. She hugged her clipboard to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting between the two officers, looking for someone, anyone, to back her up. But there was no saving face. The truth was out. She hadn't just lost this little battle. She had exposed herself as the tyrant she really was. And she didn't even realize the worst was still yet to come. Karen's face looked like it was about to explode, red blotches climbing up her neck as her lips twisted into something between a snarl and a fake smile. For years, she had been untouchable in this neighborhood. People whispered about her behind closed doors, but when she showed up at their doorsteps, clipboard in hand, they caved. They signed whatever notices she shoved at them. They paid the ridiculous fines she invented on the spot. They cut their grass at midnight just to avoid her wrath. She had built her throne on fear and intimidation, and until now, nobody had dared to challenge her. But here she was, standing in front of Emma, the new chief of police, no less, and suddenly all that bluster looked like smoke blowing away in the wind. "You can't talk to me like that," Karen snapped, though her voice cracked halfway through. "I'm the HOA president. I have authority here. This neighborhood runs because of me. Without me, it would fall apart." Emma's voice stayed even, calm, firm. "No, Karen. This neighborhood runs because people live their lives, take care of their homes, and respect each other's space. You're not keeping order, you're terrorizing people. And today, you crossed a line by calling in law enforcement over something you knew wasn't criminal." The younger officer shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but also clearly on Emma's side. The older officer crossed his arms, watching Karen with a look that said he'd seen this kind of power-hungry behavior before. "It's harassment," Emma continued, her words slicing the air. "Plain and simple. You've turned the HOA into your personal weapon, and the second someone doesn't bow down to you, you escalate. You're not protecting property values. You're abusing people." Karen's hands trembled around her clipboard. "That's not true," she shrieked, but the shrillness in her voice gave her away. I'm just doing my duty. The bylaws say," Emma cut her off. "The bylaws don't override state law. They don't give you the power to enter someone's home without permission. They don't let you dictate how quickly someone has to answer their door. And they certainly don't give you the right to waste police resources because you're having a bad morning." A couple of neighbors had started peeking out from their windows and porches by now. Word was spreading fast that Karen had called the cops on the new family, and that it was backfiring in a way nobody had ever dared to imagine. People lingered behind curtains, their eyes wide, their faces pressed close to the glass. One brave man down the street even stepped onto his porch, pretending to water his plants just to get a better view. The younger officer cleared his throat. "Chief Lawson is right. HOA disputes don't fall under criminal law. This isn't something we should be called to handle. It's a civil matter, and frankly, this call wasted our time." Karen spun toward him, her eyes wild. "Wasted your time? She ignored me. She disrespected me. If she gets away with this, everyone else will think they can get away with it too. The whole neighborhood will fall into chaos." Emma raised an eyebrow, her voice steady as ever. "Chaos? You mean people not living in fear of your clipboard? You mean neighbors feeling free to plant flowers without getting a fine? That sounds more like peace to me." The older officer actually chuckled under his breath, though he quickly covered it with a cough. Karen's face twisted in outrage, but the fight was draining out of her. She knew, deep down, she had miscalculated. She thought calling the cops would scare us, would scare Emma into opening the door, apologizing, and begging forgiveness. Instead, it had revealed the truth in front of everyone, that her so-called authority was paper-thin compared to real law. "This isn't fair," Karen whispered, her voice breaking. "I've given years of my life to this community. I keep it safe. I keep it beautiful. Without me." Emma took a step closer, lowering her voice but making sure every word carried weight. "Without you, people will breathe easier. They'll live without constant fear of harassment. And they'll realize the HOA is supposed to serve the community, not the other way around. You're not a queen, Karen. You're a neighbor. And neighbors don't call the police to settle personal grudges." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to pause in the trees. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She looked from Emma to the officers, then to the small crowd of neighbors now gathering at the edge of their lawns. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control. Everyone was watching. Everyone was seeing her for what she really was. And she couldn't spin this. She couldn't write a nasty letter or hide behind a fine. She was exposed. Emma finally broke the silence. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk back to your house quietly. You're going to stop using your position to bully people. And if you ever call my officers again for something as ridiculous as someone not answering their door, I'll personally make sure charges are filed for false reporting. Do I make myself clear?" Karen's hands twitched. Her lips trembled. For a moment, I thought she might explode, scream, throw her clipboard at the ground. But instead, she gave the smallest, stiffest nod. The young officer gave Emma a quick nod of respect. "Chief, we'll log this call as resolved." The older one gave Karen a sharp look. "And ma'am, I strongly suggest you rethink how you're handling your position." Karen turned on her heel, clutching her clipboard to her chest like it was the last piece of dignity she had left. She stormed down the driveway, but it wasn't the same confident march she had arrived with. It was the walk of someone who had been dethroned, humiliated, and forced to swallow a truth she never thought she'd face. Emma didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The damage was done, the lesson delivered. Karen had wanted a show of power, and she got one, but not the way she planned. Instead of proving herself as queen of the neighborhood, she had revealed herself as nothing more than a bully with a clipboard, outmatched and outclassed by someone who didn't even have to raise her voice. After that showdown in our driveway, nothing in the neighborhood was ever the same again. Word spread faster than wildfire, faster than gossip ever had before. By sunset that very same day, everyone on our street, and most likely everyone 2 streets over, already knew what had gone down. They knew Karen, the so-called queen of the HOA, had called the police on my wife because she didn't answer the door, and they knew that Karen had been forced to stand there, exposed and humiliated, when Emma revealed she wasn't just a new neighbor, she was the brand new chief of police. People who had spent years living under Karen's iron clipboard suddenly had a new story to whisper about, and this time, it wasn't in fear. It was in delight. The next morning, I went out to grab the paper, and 2 different neighbors walking their dogs gave me a little nod of approval, like they were saying, "We saw what happened. We're glad." One woman, who had always kept her head down when Karen passed by, whispered as she hurried past, "Your wife's amazing." Finally, someone stood up to her. Emma just brushed it off with her usual calm smile. To her, it wasn't about winning or humiliating anyone. She hadn't gone looking for a fight. She had simply refused to be bullied, and she'd refused to let Karen waste police resources for her ego. But to everyone else, Emma had become a kind of local legend overnight. Karen, on the other hand, was different. Something in her broke that day. She still walked around with her clipboard, but it wasn't the same. Her strut had turned into a shuffle, her booming voice into muttered grumbling. When she passed houses now, instead of glaring into yards like a hawk searching for violations, she kept her eyes down. If she saw Emma on the street, she practically sprinted the other way. The woman who once ruled the cul-de-sac like a dictator had been stripped of her crown, and everyone knew it. What made it worse for Karen was that she couldn't spin the story. Normally, when someone stood up to her, she'd twist it, make them out to be the villain, and rally the HOA board against them. But this time, she had called the police. Everyone saw the squad cars. Everyone saw her pointing and shouting. And everyone heard Emma reveal her badge. There was no narrative Karen could invent that would erase what the whole neighborhood had witnessed with their own eyes. A few days later, at the grocery store, I overheard 2 neighbors laughing near the produce aisle, retelling the story with their own dramatic flair. "She called the cops for a door knock," one of them said, laughing so hard she nearly dropped her apples. And then, bam, the new police chief shows her badge right in her face. I wish I'd recorded it. Even the local kids, who usually tried to avoid Karen like the plague, started joking about it. I heard one boy whisper to his friends as they biked past our house, "Careful, don't ignore Karen's knock or she'll call the cops. Oh wait, never mind, the chief lives there." It was like Karen's entire empire of fear had crumbled in a single morning. That evening, Emma and I sat on our porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The cicadas hummed, and the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass from the neighbor's yard. I leaned back in my chair and asked her, "How did you stay so calm through all of that? I thought for sure you'd lose your cool when she started demanding arrests." Emma sipped her tea and smiled. "Because bullies thrive on reactions." Karen wanted me to get flustered, to argue, to make it a scene. Instead, I stayed calm and let her expose herself. She thought she was in control, but really, she was handing me all the proof I needed to show everyone who she really was. I laughed. "So basically, you destroyed her without lifting a finger?" Emma shook her head. "I didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself. I just didn't let her drag me down with her." For a moment, we sat in silence, watching as Karen walked past at the far end of the street, her clipboard clutched tight against her chest like a security blanket. She looked smaller now, not physically, but in spirit. The swagger was gone, replaced by a kind of nervous shuffle, eyes darting from side to side as if she knew every window she passed was watching. And they probably were. It wasn't just that she had been embarrassed, it was that people had seen through her. Her greatest weapon had always been the illusion of power, the idea that nobody could stand up to her. Emma had shattered that illusion with nothing more than a badge and a calm voice. From that day on, life in the neighborhood actually felt lighter. People planted flowers without worrying about a citation. Kids played basketball in the driveway without Karen storming over to demand silence. A couple down the street even painted their shutters a bright teal, something that would have sent Karen into a meltdown before, but this time she just walked past, muttering under her breath. She still had the title of HOA president, technically, but it didn't mean much anymore. Not when the whole neighborhood knew the truth. Not when they knew there was someone here who wouldn't be bullied. Not when they knew the police chief herself lived just a few doors down. As for Emma, she went right back to her routine, unbothered. She had bigger responsibilities than HOA drama. But every now and then, when Karen slunk past our house with her head down, I'd catch the faintest smirk on Emma's face, like she knew she'd given this neighborhood something no one else could, freedom from fear. And as I sat beside her on the porch, I couldn't help but think about how perfectly fitting it was. Karen had wanted to use the police to enforce her petty rules, to scare us into obedience. Instead, she had handed her power to the very person who would make sure it never happened again. It was the day HOA Karen learned the hard way that real authority doesn't come from clipboards, fines, or loud knocks on the door. It comes from integrity, from serving people instead of controlling them. And she had learned that lesson in front of the entire neighborhood, thanks to the one woman she never should have underestimated, my wife, the new chief of police.